It's 7 p.m. Thursday, August 22nd here in Seoul.
Coming up on News Center tonight. Contrary to expectations, South Korea decides to withdraw from its military intelligence sharing pact with Japan. As Seoul scraps the pact, GSOMIA will expire on August 24th.
South Korea says it will scrap GSOMIA as Japan has caused changes to the security cooperation environment between the two sides by imposing trade restrictions. We take a look at the implications and the impact of the decision.
Top U.S. nuclear envoy Stephen Biegun wraps up his visit to South Korea following a meeting with Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Hyun-jong. Kim says North Korea-U.S. nuclear talks will likely resume.
And the household income gap between the rich and the poor in South Korea widens to the worst level in over a decade in the second quarter. We tell you why. NEWSCENTER begins now. Good evening and welcome to Arirang News Center, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Arirang.
And I'm Han-daeun. Thanks for joining us. We'll begin with a big announcement from South Korea's top office. South Korean government says it'll leave the military intelligence sharing pact with Japan.
This announcement likely to have a big impact on the already badly strained relations between Seoul and Tokyo over what started out as just a trade row. We go straight to our Shin Se-min, who is standing by at the Blue House for us with the details. Se-min, take it away.
Right, guys, the long-awaited announcement on whether or not to renew the joint real-time military information sharing pact with Japan is out. The South Korean government says it is ditching the general information sharing pact with Japan known as the GSOMIA, the General Military Information Agreement with Japan as of this year. Let me say that again. The South Korean government says it is leaving the joint real-time classified information sharing pact with Japan called GSOMIA. Now let me take you to that scene of the briefing room moments ago.
The South Korean government has decided to end the General Security of Military Information Agreement and will inform Japan of the decision via a diplomatic channel.
And the reasoning is that Japan has violated trust with South Korea by accusing Seoul of illegally transferring chemical materials to North Korea, one of the reasons Tokyo gave for imposing its export curbs. Now, it's also said that the government concluded that it is not in the national interest to continue the joint military information pact, the GSOMIA. And guys, this information sharing pact had initially been set up by all three parties, South Korea, the U.S., and Japan in November of 2016 to counter nuclear and missile threats from North Korea, part of the regional efforts to monitor the regime. But now all that seems unlikely with today's announcement.
Now, the announcement comes in contrary to what was widely believed. Many had expected that the South Korean government would extend the GSOMIA. But now that it has decided to scrap the deal, I'm sure it will have a big impact on future Korea-Japan relations as well down the line. What can we expect from now?
Right. This pact is something that had been set up to counter threats coming from North Korea on the Korean peninsula in regards to some of the military-related actions that had been going on in the past couple of years. And as for the ramifications of today's announcement, there are many, one of which is the possibility that it could negatively impact regional efforts to monitor North Korea, which has recently ramped up its military activities in the past couple of weeks. But get this, official here at the top office, shortly after the announcement said that the allies of Seoul and Washington had been closely coordinating in every step of the decision-making process up until the announcement that the pact is over. So, again, indicating that the joint bilateral deal between South Korea and the U.S. stands strong amid today's announcement. That's all from me at the hour, but I'll be sure to bring you a more comprehensive report in our later newscast. Guys?
That was our senior political correspondent Shin Se-min reporting for us at the Blue House. Thank you. Now, GSOMIA is terminated, but what exactly is the Military Information Sharing Pact? Our Hong Yu explains.
The General Security of Military Information Agreement, better known as GSOMIA, is the only military agreement made between South Korea and Japan since Korea's liberation from Imperial Japan in 1945. The agreement was signed in November 2016 after negotiations began in 2011. The then defense ministers of both countries, Kim Kwan-jin and Toshimi Kitazawa, brought up the need for the agreement. Under GSOMIA, South Korea and Japan must share all classified military information on North Korea's nuclear development and missiles that has Grade 2 classification or below. The main purpose of the agreement is to provide information the other side lacks, as South Korean radar cannot observe the moment a North Korean missile drops into the East Sea, while Japan lacks information about the moment a missile gets launched. Any information exchanged between the two countries must stay within the two countries. This year, Seoul and Tokyo exchanged classified military information about North Korea 7 times, starting from May 9th when Pyongyang launched a short-range ballistic missile KN-23, and most recently on last Friday when Pyongyang launched a new tactical weapon with similar traits to the U.S. Army's tactical missile system, known as ATACMS. Hongyu, Arirang News.
So, as we've been hearing, South Korea has decided not to extend GSOMIA. The military pact had been renewed every year since it was signed in 2016. But for this year, Japan's continuing trade restrictions against South Korea has led to Seoul taking drastic action. Let's take a closer look at this issue. And for that, I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Woo Jung-yup, Research Fellow at the Sejong Institute, who joins me in the studio today. Thank you for coming in, Dr. Woo.
Thanks for having me today.
Now, let's begin with South Korea's decision to terminate the GSOMIA. Can you first tell us of the implications of today's announcement?
So the immediate outcome of today's decision not to extend the GSOMIA by South Korean government is that there's no more information sharing between Korea and Japan. However, the further implications from today's decision is that there's going to be a serious issue on the trilateral security cooperation between Korea, U.S., and Japan, because GSOMIA was first facilitated by the United States for the information sharing between Korea and Japan.
Right, and Tokyo has said on numerous occasions that it wants GSOMIA extended. Japan's Defense Minister Takeshi Iwaya just today told reporters that Tokyo wishes for the agreement to be renewed. How do you think Japan, well, Japan has already said it's expressed regret. What other reactions do you think will Japan have?
So when Japan expressed their some negative feelings about the South Korea's not to extend the GSOMIA, actually the audience is not for Japanese or Korean. The audience is actually the U.S. government. So Japan has been mentioning that Japan wants the GSOMIA, but it would be South Korea's fault if it's not extended. So the concerns is not about like Japan's reaction, but how U.S. is going to view South Korean government today's decision. So I think we have to see how U.S. government is going to react for today's decision by South Korean government.
Right. And speaking of the U.S., GSOMIA has been extended every year now since its implementation in 2016. Some argue it's vital for South Korea's national security, but as you say, trilateral security ties with Japan and the U.S. Some question whether it will have an impact on that, and others question the effectiveness of the pact. Your thoughts?
So the GSOMIA does not mean the automatic transmission of the important information from Korea to Japan. So there's another tool that South Korea still can share the information with Japan between via United States. U.S., Korea, and Japan has trilateral information sharing agreement. So if South Korea shares the information with the United States can share the information with Japan. But however, if without GSOMIA, there is a problem if 3 countries convene together to discuss the matter, because there is no GSOMIA between Korea and Japan, Korea and Japan cannot bring up the important information when it's a trilateral settings. So I think that U.S. government probably would issue some kind of negative criticism about Korean government today's decision. But now it's South Korean government task to tell the U.S. government that why South Korean government had to make this kind of decision when we all know this kind of repercussions after we decided not to extend the GSOMIA.
Obviously, this decision is not going to help with South Korea-Japan relations, but do you think it will serve as a catalyst in improving the ties? Will it spur Japan to make some concessions, or how do you think it will affect relations down the line?
I think it definitely shows that how South Korean government is not satisfied with the current Japanese government's move. So I think there's some kind of effect that we can tell the international community that these kind of incidents are all caused by Japanese incorrect move towards South Korean government. However, we don't know yet whether this kind of move can be a catalyst for the further improving South Korean and Japan relations. So I think we still have to see that how this is going to evolve in the future, because GSOMIA is not only about bilateral issue between Korea and Japan, it's more of the issue involve the United States. So I think we have to see.
Okay, well, Dr. Woo Jung-yup, thank you for your time today. Don't go too far, because you will be joining us again for News in Depth after our newscast. In the meantime, thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
South Korea's finance minister says the government is considering a budget worth roughly $420 billion for next year. Speaking at a parliamentary meeting today, Hong Nam-gi stressed the need for an expansionary spending plan to boost the economy. That would be roughly a 9% hike from this year's budget. Hong said about $2 billion of the budget will be set aside for the parts and materials industrials to make those sectors more competitive and to develop homegrown technologies as a remedy with Japan's export curbs. The minister also said that they plan to execute 80% of the extra budget for those industries by the end of next month. President Moon Jaein has asked Korea's national universities to actively back the government's efforts to localize technologies related to parts and components. At a luncheon with the heads of 24 national universities at the Blue House earlier today, President Moon emphasized that it's a national priority. He also called on them to do better in their role as the center of regional innovation. He added that if they do, it'll not only help nurture talent in each region, but also foster balanced regional development. Japan's trade minister, meanwhile, said Tokyo is open to talks with Seoul to resolve their trade dispute only if Korea meets what he called preconditions. In an interview with Japan's Sankei Shimbun, Hiroshige Seko explained that in order for director-level talks to resume, Seoul must correct its description of last month's meeting in Tokyo between officials from both nations. He claimed that Seoul misled the public by calling that meeting a negotiation where Korea demanded Japan withdraw its export curbs. But Seko claimed that the Korean side had accepted that the meeting was just a one-way briefing of Japan's decision without any demands from the Korean delegation. Washington's point man on North Korea, Stephen Biegun, met Seoul's Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Hyun-jong today before leaving Seoul. From that meeting, Kim got the impression that the stalled North Korea-U.S. nuclear talks will resume soon. Our Park Hee-jun with the details.
It appears the nuclearization talks between North Korea and the U.S. will resume soon, says South Korea's Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Hyun-jong. After meeting Washington's top envoy on North Korea, Stephen Biegun, in Seoul on Thursday, he told reporters that's the impression he got from Biegun.
I cannot reveal all the details from the more than an hour-long talks we had, but I got the impression the dialogue between North Korea and the U.S. will resume soon, and I think that'll go well.
And he reaffirmed that South Korea maintains a good cooperative relationship on the matter with the U.S.
South Korea and the U.S. are coordinating closely on the negotiations and the denuclearization process. The two sides will continue to work well together and will most likely share everything with each other thanks to the confidence Bigan and his counterpart Lee Dong have in each other.
Even with Pyongyang's statement the same day that appears to reject the possibility, Kim said he believes they will start again. He did not, however, elaborate on why, but he did say that the U.S. appreciates South Korea's moderation to achieve its goal despite the North's continued harsh rhetoric toward the South. According to Kim, Bigan also raised the issue of cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo, including South Korea and Japan's military intelligence sharing pact. But again, no further details. Meanwhile, Bigan, before leaving the country, met with his South Korean counterpart Lee Do-hoon and Unification Minister Kim Yeon-chol. There had been hope that he might sit down with North Koreans at the demilitarized zone during his trip, but there are no signs that he did. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
Despite continued calls on North Korea to come to the negotiating table, North Korea is not interested in talks, and such a stance comes as the regime slams Seoul and Washington for killing what it called the dialogue atmosphere. Oh Jung-hee reports.
North Korea was quick to respond to the arrival of the additional F-35A stealth fighter jets in South Korea on Wednesday. On Thursday, Pyongyang's foreign ministry released a statement criticizing Seoul's, quote, arms reinforcement. It stressed that South Korea, despite the North's continued warnings, is now bringing in F-35A stealth fighter jets from the U.S. right after their joint military exercise ended. The Seoul-Washington exercise, combined command post training, ended on Tuesday, and two F-35A stealth fighters arrived in South Korea's Cheongju Air Base on Wednesday. Another two jets will arrive this week, bringing the number of the jets owned by Seoul to 8. The North said the moves were, quote, increasing military hostilities from South Korea and the U.S., which kills the momentum for dialogue and pushes the North to look for ways to deter the threat. Pyongyang added it still hopes to resolve the issues peacefully through dialogue and negotiations, but that it's not interested in dialogue that accompanies military threats. Hopes were that North Korea would come back to the negotiating table with the U.S. once the Seoul-Washington joint drills ended, just as Kim Jong-un told President Trump in a letter 2 weeks ago. But the North, for now, is continuing a streak of condemnations against South Korea and the U.S. However, speculation is that working-level negotiations between Pyongyang and Washington could take place in early September. That after the North holds its parliamentary meeting of the Supreme People's Assembly next week and determines its stance. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Let's turn to some economic-related news now. And the income of the bottom 20% of households ended its year-and-a-half-long decline in the second quarter of this year. However, the gap between the rich and the poor has widened as the remaining 80% of households' income went up. House Hon-kyung has the details.
According to Statistics Korea on Thursday, the average monthly household income for the second quarter was about $3,890, up 3.8% on year. But not every citizen enjoyed the increase. While the income of the bottom 20% of households stayed the same on year, the other 80% of households saw their income increase by between 3.2% and 6%. The increase in the number of unemployed households in the bottom 20% was seen as one of the main reasons why it didn't see an increase. Only 29.8% of households in the bottom 20% contained people in employment, down from 32.6% in the same period last year. Wage income for the bottom 20% of households fell by around 15% a year, but income from the self-employed increased by almost 16% over the same period. The income gap between South Korea's wealthiest and poorest citizens widened to its biggest margin since 2003, with the top 20% of earners taking home an average of 5.3 times the income of the bottom 20%. Meanwhile, the Bank of Korea reported on Thursday that household debt rose by 4.3% a year to reach a record high $1,289 billion in the second quarter. Hyeon-kyung, Arirang News.
Prices at the pump will start to rise next month when a tax break on fuel comes to an end. The Finance Ministry says it will not extend the temporary fuel tax cut, which means gasoline will go up around 50 US cents a litre and diesel about 30 cents. Last November, the government had cut fuel taxes by 15% for 6 months to help ordinary citizens and boost the economy amid rising global oil prices. In May, the ministry extended the tax cut for another 4 months, but made it smaller. Industry watchers say the decision was made due to concerns over shrinking tax revenues and because oil prices have come down. Facebook has won its lawsuit against South Korea's communications watchdog. A court in Seoul turned down the watchdog's claim that the social media giant should be penalized for intentionally causing traffic delays over a conflict with local internet service providers. Yoon Jung-min with the details.
In a ruling that is likely to affect negotiations between local internet service providers and global IT firms, the Seoul Administrative Court ruled in favor of Facebook on Thursday, saying it is unjust for South Korea's communications watchdog to slap a penalty on the social media giant for intentionally delaying traffic. Last March, the Korea Communications Commission imposed a fine of some $328,000 on Facebook, arguing the company intentionally slowed down access speed to the social network, causing inconvenience to its users in Korea. Facebook had filed a lawsuit to appeal the fine, and the administrative court said it does not believe Facebook intentionally caused the problem. The Communications Commission said it's going to appeal to a higher court. The watchdog claims that in 2016, Facebook cut a faster local server and rerouted the traffic to a slower overseas server in Hong Kong amid ongoing negotiations on network usage fees with local telecom companies. Until then, Facebook had been paying KT for the use of its cache server. Subscribers using local telecom companies LG and SK had been routed to the KT server when accessing the social network, but the two companies asked Facebook to use their own separate servers since the Science Ministry changed network sharing regulations. Facebook rejected the offer and cut off the KT server, offering the service via the server in Hong Kong instead. Korean IT firms have been complaining about global content providers such as YouTube or Netflix for not paying enough fees for using local networks, as there are no guidelines for foreign companies. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
It's been over a year since China and the U.S. have been going at each other over trade, and latest data shows that the trade war has been hurting both countries' economies. Our Kim Hye-sung explains.
China's 3 major electronics goods have seen production fall amid the prolonged U.S.-China trade war. According to the Korea Electronics Association, China's color TVs, semiconductors, and smartphone production fell on-year for the month of June. Color TV production fell near 2% on-year and 11% on-month to 14 million units in June. It's the first time in about 2 years that production posted on-year negative growth. The report said China's domestic demand has entered a mature stage, and the ongoing U.S.-China trade spat hurt the global trade environment, driving down China's exports. Smartphone production also fell 0.6% on-year to around 150 million units. Semiconductor production also dropped to less than 15 billion units on sluggish global demand for chips. Auto production and robots production also nosedived by double digits. The ongoing trade war is also weighing on the U.S. economy. The U.S. Congressional Budget Office said Wednesday local time the budget deficit is set to hit over $1 trillion by fiscal year 2020, 2 years earlier than previously estimated. The CBO said federal debt is rising faster than expected due to increased federal spending and growing per capita healthcare spending. It also singled out tariffs as hurting the U.S. economy as they raise prices, curb investment, and increase costs for businesses. The CBO said as a result of tariffs imposed by the U.S. and others since last year, U.S. GDP would be 0.3% lower by 2020 than it would have been otherwise, and real average household income will be reduced by $550. Since last year, the U.S. and China have already exchanged tariffs on over $360 billion of goods. Trump's new tariffs on another $300 billion of Chinese imports, including a range of consumer goods, will kick in later this year. Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
Now, last week, Apple CEO Tim Cook told President Trump that the trade war with China is making it harder for Apple to compete with South Korean tech giant Samsung. So, Trump has once again promised Apple that he will help. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Speaking to reporters at the White House on Wednesday, U.S. President Donald Trump reiterated he'll help Apple short-term, highlighting the issue of the American company having to pay hefty U.S. tariffs while Samsung does not. His latest reference to the two tech giants comes a matter of days after Trump told reporters that Apple CEO Tim Cook recently expressed his concerns over the Trump administration's tariffs on China.
And Tim was talking to me about tariffs. And, you know, one of the things, and he made a good case, is that Samsung is their #1 competitor, and Samsung is not paying tariffs because they're based in South Korea. And it's tough for Apple to pay tariffs if they're competing with a very good company that's not.
While the Trump administration initially planned to impose an additional 10% tariff on $300 billion worth of Chinese goods starting next month, it recently postponed extra tariffs on consumer goods like cell phones and laptops until mid-December. Meanwhile, Apple, which is looking to slash its reliance on Samsung's display technology, is reportedly in the final stages of certifying advanced screens from top Chinese display maker BOE Technology Group for its next generation of iPhones. Observers say the entry of BOE could threaten the South Korean company's dominating position in the display industry and give Apple more leverage to squeeze price cuts out of Samsung. The iPhone maker currently buys OLEDs from Samsung Electronics, which dominates the global premium screen market with a more than 90% share. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The South Korean government will be investing billions next year to develop the automobiles of the future, such as self-driving cars. That's one of 3 industries where the government plans to find and nurture a first mover that can lead globally. Our Choi Si-young brings us part 2 of our series on how South Korea could do better on its plan to make the nation a pioneer economy rather than one that tries to chase others.
Back in April, the Moon administration announced that it's going to foster the industries of future cars, biohealth, and non-memory semiconductors to sharpen South Korea's competitive edge in those sectors and create more jobs. On Wednesday, Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi unveiled how the government will spend its budget to do that. Starting next year, it'll invest around $2.5 billion on the 3 sectors. Almost half of that is dedicated to developing the automobiles of the future, such as electric and self-driving cars. South Korea is lagging further behind its competitors in self-driving technologies than in electric cars, and this is one of the reasons the Trade and Science Ministries together are injecting another $25 million for self-driving cars on their own. Some experts say the government is focusing only on the latest technology.
For the past years, we've been actually developing self-driving technologies. What we haven't been doing is finding areas where we can apply these technologies. We should pay more attention to what those might be and how we can do that.
The expert went on to say that some are in the transportation and logistics industries where self-driving technologies could bring more efficiency. He also urged companies to do their part.
Companies themselves, when doing R&D, should think about how their technology can appeal to other sectors and consumers so that the new technology leads to a greater synergy effect later.
South Korea is still trying to catch up with leaders in self-driving tech like Google, but experts say the government and local firms could narrow that gap faster than expected with the right strategy and funding. Choi Si-young, Arirang News.
A new type of virtual reality has been introduced in South Korea. In addition to pictures on a headset, this VR system has physical objects to touch, making it feel even more real. Our Kan Young-woo tells us more.
The line between the virtual world and reality has gotten more blurred in South Korea. This is the newly opened nomadic VR arcade in CGV Gangbyeon, a local theater near Dongseol bus terminal. Once you put on the VR gear and start the shooting game to fight zombies, you can actually touch and feel different objects you see in the virtual world. So if there's a door in front of you in the virtual world, a real door exists in the same exact spot in the real world. The touchable objects include doors, buttons, levers, and drawers. Up to 4 people can play at the same time. Each person has a rifle which vibrates every time you fire it, making it feel like you're really shooting down zombies.
I felt like I was actually in The Walking Dead and that I was the main character, which was awesome. This was also my first time trying VR that I could touch. It was an incredible and fresh experience.
This type of combination between virtual and physical reality tricks your mind into thinking that you're actually there. But the developers say they're thinking even bigger.
So hopefully in the near future, in fact, we expect people to perhaps come see a superhero movie here in CGV and then come to a place like here and actually go into the movie and meet the heroes that you just met and be one of them.
The Nomadic VR Arcade is open every day from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. and until September 16, the entrance fee has a 50% discount at 7,500 won, about $6 US. Kanyong, Arirang News.
Professional baseball is one of the most loved sports in South Korea, but women's baseball currently doesn't have a pro league. To encourage the development of the women's game, one South Korean company is hosting the country's only women's international baseball tournament, which is now in its 4th year. Our Lee Min-sun went to this year's opening ceremony and files this report.
The 4th edition of LG Cup International Women's Baseball Tournament opened on Thursday with Korea taking on the U.S. at LG Champions Park in Icheon, Gyeonggi-do Province. It's the only international women's baseball tournament held in Korea. LG Electronics has been partnering with the Women's Baseball Association of Korea to hold the event since 2014, aiming to expand women's baseball in the country. The event kicked off with an opening ceremony which incorporated Korea's traditional culture, including an instrument performance by students from Kugak National High School. The tournament features 8 teams from 7 countries, including 2 teams from South Korea and 1 each from the U.S., Taiwan, Hong Kong, Australia, and a united team from European countries. It's the first time that a united European team made up of players from France, England, and the Netherlands is competing at the tournament. A team from Japan is also participating, aiming for their 4th victory at the tournament. Teams will compete in total of 20 games from preliminary rounds to the final on August 26, where the 2 best teams will go head-to-head for a trophy made especially from local Icheon Polk Lane. Team Korea will also compete at the Baseball Federation of Asia tournament in China this November, hoping to earn a place at the Women's Baseball World Cup in 2020. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News, Icheon.
The weather felt much more bearable after the rain, but it's expected to get cooler tomorrow.
A certain sign that autumn is near. For more details, let's turn to our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle.
Now, it looks like autumn is about to begin. The daytime highs will be about 1 or 2 degrees lower than today, now with some regions hovering under the 30-degree mark. However, nearby Beijing is still very hot and expecting a high of 32 degrees Celsius with a blanket of clouds. Now, the tropical nights look likely to be over for the northern parts of South Korea, including Seoul. And by the morning, Seoul will wake up to 21 degrees Celsius tomorrow, while Daegu starts the day at 22. However, Busan and Jeju are still experiencing hot nights with morning lows of 25 degrees Celsius. The week will end with a sunny Friday across the country, but make sure to apply sunblock since UV levels are expected to be very high tomorrow. Now, Seoul will top to 29 degrees and Busan and Jeju will hit up to 29 and 28 degrees respectively. Now, we can expect mild weather throughout the weekend and cooler temperatures will remain. And although the capital will stay dry, the southern regions will receive another bout of rain next week. I'll leave you with weather conditions around the world.
That will wrap it up for this edition of Arirang News. Thank you, as always, for watching.
We'll discuss more on Korea's decision to terminate its military intelligence sharing pact with Japan on NEWSCENTER coming up next, so don't go away.